Actually, probably Susan ought to go first in many ways, because I see this as an authorization and an appropriation process. No, so do you want to do that?
Sure.
Yeah,
sure.
why don't you talk about
What do you
the
know?
Hey.
Appropriators, and you know what? As Chris said, and thank you so much, Jim, and to your team for inviting us to be here. I actually came and spoke about PAPA, Pandemic Hazard Preparedness Act, when we were getting ready to vote on it. We had worked very hard, and by the way, this was a Richard Burr Anna Eshoo bill back in 05-06. It was originally authorized then, and that was in response in large part to the anthrax attacks that some of you may have experienced if you were on Capitol Hill at that time. I was a U.S. attorney, and I actually received one of those hoax letters. One of my staff opened a letter with the powder in it, and back then, that was a significant problem around the country. So I got engaged in this back then, and then when I came to Congress, Mike Rogers of Michigan, who had been a champion for this, actually asked me, we learned about our backgrounds, and asked me to get engaged in this. I had no clue what PAPA was. I had not heard about it. And it's one of those types of bills, and one of those types has the type of issues in it that people just expect us in government to take care of. They really don't want to know about it until they need it. And when I saw all that was in PAPA and learned from folks like Chris and Kelly and others all that we need to do to keep improving it, that's what we did in this last authorization. We relied on the 2015 report led by Governor Ridge and Senator Lieberman. It's called the Blue Ribbon Panel on Biodefense. They gave us really they gave us a way forward, a book with all these recommendations that experts around the country had put together. And that's what Anna Eshoo and I really focused our work on. Catherine Knowles, who's now one of my staffers now with the Alzheimer's Association, really led it for me. But we took that and improved PAPA and kept improving it. And luckily, I went and talked with Chairman Cole, or ranking member, or actually you were the Cardinal Cole at the time, to really, and was so pleased that he was so passionate about it, had been so knowledgeable about it, had been finding ways to increase appropriations for a very long time. And so in this we got it done, finally signed into law in June of 19. I want to just tell you one little thing. I had this private bill signing with President Trump. I don't know if I've ever told you this. So I go in, actually my team kind of arranged that, because it was Senator Burr's bill at the time, if you look it up, Papa, but my team had really worked on it. I walked into the Oval Office, Eric Ulan was there, one other staffer, and just, he was incredibly knowledgeable about the bill. He actually started asking me a lot of questions. It wasn't just a signing, how you doing, what's happening, you know, I'm now retiring at the end of this Congress. Of course, he wanted to kind of know about Indiana and so forth. But I was really impressed by what a deep knowledge he actually had about the bill. And he cared very much about the bill. So and then he, you know, I also suggested to him that we needed to have someone leading the effort, because that was what the biodefense panel had said. We have to have someone leading whole of government effort. It shouldn't just be someone out of HHS. Of course, he asked me, he goes, do you have a suggestion, like I was interviewing for the job? I said, no, that's not what I mean. I don't mean me. And I really did think he thought I wanted the job. But I said, no, I think someone in your administration who can, you know, really reach out across government. And so last week when he appointed the vice president, and while some people might say he doesn't have a medical background, that was actually the #1 recommendation in the Blue Ribbon Study Panel, was to take the office of the vice president and put them in charge of the biodefense strategy. And so please make sure people realize this. This wasn't just the president coming up and tapping former Governor Mike Pence, who had a background, though, in public health issues, but it was the recommendation of the task force. And now that he's brought on Ambassador Debbie Birx, she is a rock star in this community. She's led the PEPFAR efforts for the country. She's a doctor. She's a colonel. She's an infectious disease person. I mean, she is an amazing, I think, going to be an amazing right-hand leader and coordinator for him. So, okay, that's enough. And then I was on the CSS commission with Tom, but also Dr. Ami Bera, Anna Eshoo was on it. There are other senators were on it as well. And I strongly urge you to look at that report, which was issued in November, before we knew what COVID-19 was. And I think that's the challenge, is we keep new emerging infectious diseases, pop up around the world. Some we have no idea what they are, like this one, novel, new. Others that, infectious disease people do know about, Ebola, Zika. Well, I had not really heard of those until they really popped up. And so under Tom's leadership, we now have an emerging infectious disease rapid response fund. We are trying to not always get sucked into waiting for supplementals so government can act. We're bolstering our strategic national stockpiles. We're investing more in hospital preparedness programs, because at the end of the day, that patient's going to walk into a clinic, whether it's a minute clinic, CVS, Walgreens, they're going to walk into a clinic. They're going to go to their primary care doc. They're going to go maybe into a hospital. And so we need to make sure that all healthcare providers are prepared for this. I want to just mention Rusty and Roche Diagnostic, because I represent Roche Diagnostic headquarters in North America, and I'm very proud of that. But we also gave authorization for diagnostic testing to be included in the strategic national stockpiles. Sadly, I'm not sure it is yet, that we have invested that way, and that's where, the government's being criticized now. But we do have the authority, a lot of good things. Check out PAPA in your spare time, now that everyone, I will say, I believe today the Vice President is leading the Washington delegation, or on Air Force Two, back to Washington State, because the deaths are primarily coming, I think except for one, from one senior living community. And so just yesterday, CMS elevated the standards for long-term care communities. So for those of you who have family or friends in long-term care communities, new higher security and infectious disease standards have been put in place. There are going to be enforcement efforts, and the government is going to be focusing on that. The other thing I learned from Susan Del Bene is that the firefighters who went and responded to that are now in quarantine as well. So this has a ripple effect of things we kind of don't always think about, but need to drill, practice, and be more knowledgeable about. Okay, with that, Tom, can you tell I'm really passionate about this? Sorry.
Yeah. Why are you leaving then? You need to stay. Yeah, you ended this just like, well, I'm out of here. But I asked Susan to go first because, look, there's actually a really good story here from both a congressional and a Republican standpoint. And I'm not saying anybody's happy with what we're dealing with right now, but we're certainly not dealing with it unprepared or with no thought having been given to it, which is kind of a line that's out there. It's quite the opposite. I always like to give the authorizers a lot of credit. I mean, this starts with 21st Century Cures, this starts with PAPA, this starts with people actually talking about it. But, once you get a bold vision laid out, appropriators are sort of like your father. They're the one, well, how much is it going to cost? And where are we going to get the money for that? And, matter of fact, I remember the year that we passed 21st Century Cures, and our former colleague, Tim Murphy, of course, forgot more about mental health than most of us know, and he'd gotten all this stuff in there, and he comes to see me, I need to fund this, and I said, Tim, with all due respect, my budget's been cut by the Budget Committee by $5 billion in the Labor H budget. And all these are new authorizations. I have less money. You want to make a list of the stuff that I'm not going to fund so I can fund all of your stuff? That ain't going to happen. Now, I'll end up with more money because at the end of the day, we're going to cut a deal with the Democrats because we have to have their votes in the United States Senate. And this account will always be plussed up. This is the Democrat. It's Labor H. It's their favorite thing in the world. I mean, so the deal will be here. Our defense hawks will want more money. They'll get more money. The price will be paid here. My number will go up. So I will actually have more money at the end, and we'll sit down and look at these things. At that point, it worked out that way. But when I became Labor H chairman, I spent a lot of time talking to staff, talking to other people that had interest in this area, and frankly, thinking through what the real issues were. Because, and one of the things that really alarmed me is we had not increased funding in the National Institute of Health for 12 years. We're the party that had doubled that between the late 90s and 2003, and neither we nor the Democrats did anything about it. and we dropped from funding about 1 out of every 3 research proposals to about 1 out of every 6. And when I talked to really smart people about this, it was also beginning to have an impact on how many people would go into biomedical research, pretty tough field. This is not like, philosophy or something. You got to really know what you're doing. And if you can't get a research grant, no offense to any of you philosophers, as a Victorian historian, I feel your pain. But the reality is, it matters. You're sending signals to people about that are going to have to really work hard. And the average researcher, by the way, we've got special programs to fix this, didn't normally get their first NIH grant until they're 45. And that number was moving up. So, a lot of people in their 20s are making decisions. And do I have to wait 20 years to be able to get funded research? And they don't do these jobs usually to teach. They teach so they can research. But anyway, so I looked at that, looked at strategic stockpile, looked at CDC. All of them had been underfunded and basically flat funded. And we were, had lived through the era of sequesters and across the board cuts and all these discretionary programs. So we were really poorly prepared. And a phrase I used to use back then when I would talk to my colleagues or talk to the media was, look, you're a lot more likely to die in a pandemic than a terrorist attack. And that's true. And you're actually seeing that unfold today. So you better be prepared. This is defending the American people just like the Pentagon budget is. And actually, it's more applicable to the average American than every weapon system we own. I say that as a defense hawk. I'm not arguing to do less in defense at all. I'm just saying you need to look at this exactly the same way. Partly because it could involve bioterrorism, could involve a hostile power, but mostly because, believe me, the biosphere will throw something at you. And I'll tell this story, and I want to make a few points on the approach process. When Mick Mulvaney, and God bless him, I served with Mick, I like Mick, so this is not meant to be a shot at Mick at all, but he was OMB director. He came to visit with me about our budget. And I said, Mick, we've already started down a path because we began when Obama was president. Roy Blunt and I, and God bless Roy Blunt, he is a real hero in this entire effort. My counterpart, obviously. I said, Roy and I had decided 2+ years ago that we are going to plus up NIH, we are going to plus up CDC, we are going to plus up the strategic stockpile. And it's going to be like all appropriations processes. We don't do something, we're not, I always say different committees have different personalities. E&C and Ways and Means are what I call home run committees. They swing for the fences. And so you'll get a 21st century cures, or you'll get a overhaul of the tax code. But you get that about once every 10 years, or once every, approach has to get its job done every single year, or the government's not funded. And you can't change everything overnight in a year. So what you've got to do is have long-term goals, and the process is always incremental and cumulative. Where do we want to go? How much can I do this year toward that? And if you look over the last 5 years, NIH funding is up 39%, CDC funding is up 24%, strategic stockpile north of 30%. It was the Appropriations Committee. Actually, when I was chairman, it came up with the idea, hey, let's have a rapid response, an infectious disease rapid response fund. It took me 2 years to convince the Senate because I said, they'll always have an emergency and they'll always use it, and we should make them raid their other accounts. And there's actually an argument for that. But we're sure as hell glad we had it this year. And we set that up in fiscal year 2017. I asked for $300 million. I got 50. Told the guys at CDC, please don't spend it all. I got to convince these people that, because the mechanism was, if you don't spend it, it stays, it rolls over, and we add to it the next year. Because we all knew $50 million. And so they had an Ebola outbreak. They had to spend about 30, but 20 rolled over. Rosa DeLauro put in 85, because we've talked about this a lot. All of a sudden, we had 105. Now that money's gone, but guess what? Yesterday's supplemental, we have the original $300 million that I recommended. So magically, it comes around. I said that, so when I sat down with Mick and we were talking about it, I said, so this is going to happen. This is going to happen regardless. So put it in your budget. And I know you've got some magic number you need to reach. I will show you other places in my budget that you can get to your number. Now, I will tell you they're not going to become law because you got to have Democrats in the Senate to get to 60, and they're never going to agree to these kind of cuts. But if you got to balance something in a budget, I get it. It's your initial, negotiating. But take credit for this. Give the president credit. Didn't do it. And so for 3 years in a row, we've had Trump proposals to cut NIH, cut CDC, cut the strategic stockpile. And last week, Secretary Azar, very good guy, by the way, is up here trying to explain, while he's presenting his budget at Labor H, I'm asking for a $3 billion cut in NIH. I'm asking for a $700 million cut in CDC. And by the way, I need a supplemental that's going to go largely to these two agencies. I mean, how smart is that? And so that just frustrates me, because I used to help write budgets for Frank Keating, and we thought of them as political documents, and we knew where we needed to plus up and how to do this. And this is a problem, when there's not a connection between the budgeting and the political, and you're not thinking. Not to mention, this is an imperative. So I give our authorizers lots of credit for having anticipated and seen the problems and laid it out. But I give our appropriators lots of credit for having gone year after year after year. And every one of those 5 years, by the way, we put in more money than either Obama asked for, and certainly more money than this president asked for. This is actually a case of Congress. Just as Congress doubled NIH funding, that was a congressional initiative. There was no initiative from either Clinton or President Bush to double NIH funding. That was something that Newt Gingrich and John Porter and people in that era thought through as an important national objective, and they managed to do it while they were balancing the budget. Pretty incredible achievement on their part. We did exactly the same thing in the appropriations, this process. So you can literally sit there, and now we can say we've been thinking about this for a long time, and we've taken the steps. Now, is the execution perfect? No, but it's actually been much better. We had a testing kit problem. That's really been the only real problem in this, and that's remedied, and we're moving on. I cut people a lot of slack when you're dealing with a virus nobody's ever seen before, and it starts someplace else in the world, and we have a government there which has been better than in MERS, but still not totally transparent with it, still didn't ring the alarm bells soon enough. But the mechanisms have gone into place. So I end with the lessons. Our authorizers have been doing the right thing for a long time. Then we married up the appropriations with the vision that they laid out, and we prepared because we knew this day would come. I actually remember telling Mick, and unfortunately I keep a journal, so I went back and read all this stuff. I did say that stuff, and I can prove it. I said, I hope you don't have to deal with a terrorist attack. I really do. I mean, none of us would want that to happen. But I guarantee you, in your first term, the biosphere is going to throw something at you. You're going to get a MERS or a SARS or a Zika or an Ebola. It's coming. It will come. And you don't want to be the guys that cut the defense mechanisms for the American people any more than you want to be the guys that cut the Pentagon before a war or attack. It's just simple. There are other things in here that are great and that are important, but they aren't life-preserving in the way this complex of really unique institutions that we have is. So we should be the party, and we have historically been the party, actually, that's done a really good job in these areas. I will tell you the problem that each year we built this up, we had fights with the Democrats, not because they were against what we were trying to do. There's just too many things in the Labor H bill they love. And their natural instinct is to do a little bit for everything. Blunt and I's natural instinct is let's pick 3 or 4 big things, do something really bold, and kind of manage the rest. And so literally every year, if you watch, there'd be a presidential proposal. We actually had this gamed out. Then I would offer a proposal that was bigger. Then Blunt would offer a proposal that was bigger than mine. Then we would add my number and the president's number and compromise at his number. So it moved up every year when Obama, and the same thing, I mean, obviously Trump was moving down, but I would always say, here's my initial proposal, but whatever my friend in the Senate does, I'm going to match. We will find a way in the course of the negotiation. So we always moved up. And that paid off enormously well for this country, but it paid off enormously well politically for this administration, because they don't have to explain the cuts they propose that never happened. And they get to use the increases that a Republican Congress said, these are important. We're going to do something, and we're going to build it into the process where every year, no matter what year? I remember one year we actually had $1 billion less to spend that year in labor age. We increased NIH, let's just use them for example, by 2. So literally, Dr. Collins, I used to say, you got every new dollar I got, and I stole the $1 billion from little children in early childhood programs, so you could have another $1 billion or something like that. We never stole from early childhood programs. Just because, it is on film, isn't it? No, we'd never do that. But the reality is, I mean, that's just prioritization. That's what appropriators are supposed to do. There's a little bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul, but you make Paul the NIH, the CDC, the strategic stockpile, and you build that in every year so people get used to, and well, this is just something we do, just like defense. We do defense. So anyway, again, good story for Congress because it saw ahead, frankly, more than either of the last 2 administrations. Good story for Congress because it funded the vision, and it's continued to fund that vision in a bipartisan way, in a split, House and Senate. We had those appropriations last year. And by the way, all 4 years that I was chairman, Rosa DeLore always voted against my bill. She should have. Then once we got into negotiations, she always voted for final passage. We always came to a deal. I did the same thing for her last year. I told her the other day, look, I'm going to vote against your June, July bill, but we get to sit down with the Republicans in the Senate. We'll negotiate a deal. I'll come back and help you pass it. So again, Congress occasionally works a little bit better than it gets credit for.
Thank you both.